Hey, I'm Rob Douglas. I am the pastor of a relatively new church plant out in the Thousand Oaks area, which is about an hour north of here. What I was asked to do was to share my story in planting and that kind of thing. And so it's definitely not an academic presentation. It's just sharing some of the things that we went through in order to try to start a new church, and it's messy. And so, what I want to do is just share that story Nick asked me to share with you guys, and then have some time to do some Q&A and stuff like that. So it'll be really, really informal, and I'll just I broke it down into a few different parts. And the first part is to be my background, so you kind of know who I am and understand where I came from and how I got to this point. I'm married. I have 2 kids, twin girls that are 15. Almost 16, so they're just about ready to drive. So we're like in a whole new phase right now for us. I grew up in the church. I started out as a kid. My parents come from different backgrounds. They went to Lutheran college, but I've got great grandfathers and uncles and whatnot that are in the Assemblies of God tradition. I grew up in a UCC church as a kid, and then from middle school on, PCUSA. So, and that just happened because my mom said, when we moved out here, she said, where do you guys want to go to church? And we went to all the churches, and my brother and I were like, we want to go to this one because it had the cool youth group. And so that's how I got to PCUSA, and I just decided to stay. I felt like a fit with them. And so growing up, my mom was a great role model for me, and was kind of the person that mentored me and taught me what it looked like to follow Jesus and give Jesus your life. And so I had good youth ministry experiences as a kid, and so when I was in college, I did some volunteering for 4 or 5 years through college, helping out just as a volunteer youth worker when I was around. I was a history undergrad, and then when I was finished with college, what my plan was that I wanted to teach and go on and get a master's in history and PhD and teach. And then I was already set, kind of had my acceptance to a graduate school, and I walked on campus and said, something's not right. And I couldn't put my finger on what it was, but I was at least smart enough to say that this is not what I'm supposed to be doing, even though I had no idea what it was that I was supposed to be doing. And then I look back, and I had friends and pastors that were sending me Fuller applications my senior year in college. I think I received 3 or 4 of them, and every time I got them, I never opened one. I just dropped them straight in the trash. And so I had zero intentions of being in ministry as anything but a volunteer. And 3 months later, I was enrolled at Fuller. So I did an MA at Fuller in the 90s with zero intention of doing what I do now as well. So I did an MA. I didn't want to be ordained. I avoided it like the plague. I still avoid it like the plague, to be real honest. And I wasn't sure what I was doing at Fuller. And I remember my first day at Fuller was Dr. Mao's first day as president. And so he gave his first speech to the incoming students. I'll never forget, he said, how many of you wonder, what the heck it is you're doing here? And I seriously wanted to stand up on my chair and jump up and down and scream out. I had no clue what I was doing there. And at the exact same time, I received a call from a pastor I did not know. And the pastor was about 20 minutes away at a church I'd never even heard of, and it was only 15 minutes down the road. And he said, I hear you're ready to take over a youth ministry program. And I said, no, you got the wrong guy. And he said, well, let me get you lunch, and will you at least talk to me about it? And as a sucker for free food, I took the lunch, and a couple of weeks later started Fuller and working as a youth pastor at the same time. So a huge change for me. And so I did 20 years full-time as a youth pastor. So that's my background. 3 PCUSA churches, 1 for 4 years while I was in school. They couldn't afford to keep me once I finished school, unfortunately, or I would have stayed. 4 years at Brentwood, and then 15 or so years, almost 14 years at Westminster Presbyterian Church, which is in Westlake Village, which is right close to where I grew up. That is my home church, so it's real interesting how that worked out too. Maybe not as interesting for you guys. So 20 years as a youth pastor with no intentions of doing anything else. If you make a year and a half as a youth pastor, you're like, you've done pretty good. So 20 years says I was in it for the long haul. I actually thought I'd be one of the few people who start and finish a ministry career in youth ministry. So I've started moving into writing and doing some teaching and stuff like that, kind of helping out other people, thinking that even as I got older, I still might have a role doing something slightly different. And when I look back on it, you know, I see that all of these things were preparing me for something that I resisted, avoided, and frankly did not want to do. And so those conversations about church planning for me began maybe 4+ years ago, and they were actually started conversations with Nick Warnes, whom you guys, I'm assuming, all know pretty well. And he and I became friends because if you are associated with this church, Bo Womack used to work with me for years. And that's how I met Nick. And so Nick and I became friends. And after, you know, a couple times of hanging out with Nick, Nick said, well, have you ever considered church planting? And I said, well, I did for a day when I was really mad at my senior pastor. And that was about it. I honestly it wasn't something that I'd ever really thought of. In these initial conversations, he started saying, well, you're the type of person, have the type of background that might do well at this if this is something that God ever calls you to. And then, you know, he said, well, would you be willing to talk to our presbytery about it? And I said, sure, I'm willing to talk about it, you know, with no intentions of doing it. The free lunch kind of thing. And you'll see a theme here for sure. And so having initial conversations with Ken Baker, who's now is the executive presbyter at San Fernando Presbytery, which is where I came out of, he kind of, after some initial conversation with him and Nick, thought that I was somebody that they were interested in looking at and seeing if I would be willing to go through a kind of discernment process. So I'm assuming that some of you are kind of, I'm not sure where everybody's at, but some of you may be in that kind of discernment phase process right now. And this was, to me, the most fascinating part of my journey for this was the discernment phase, because I did not want to do it. And I can't stress that enough. A lot of people want to be church planners, and it's like a cool thing to do or whatever. It was not for me. That definitely does not describe me at all. I actually did not want to do it. I was very happy where I was, and that maybe am very comfortable, and that may have been part of the problem for me. I probably got in the way of myself, got in the way of what God was trying to do through me because I was stubborn and happy and content in my situation. So I had no intention of leaving. But I agreed to the assessment process. So I took the written test from the denomination, and I went to get my results. I met with Ken Baker, the EP, and we sat down. It was actually somewhere down here. What's that, Good Life brewery place? Has anyone ever been there? Mm-hmm. Well, he brings me in there, and the day I come back from a mission trip, you know, I was bald and had a beard and was t-shirt and sandals. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And he says, you know, you scored really highly on the, you know, assessment test. And then at the end of the process, he says, this was a great interview. And I said, this was an interview? And I'm like, looking at how and he says, you know, of all the people we've interviewed, you're the person that interests us the most in planting a church within this presbytery. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. You know, I just wasn't getting it, you know. And so he asked if I'd agree to a weekend assessment. So I said, sure. You know, so they had 4 candidates that they were looking at, and I was one of them. And I thought, you know, my wife was invited to go with me, and, you know, we both said, oh, as soon as we get here, they'll kick me out for sure. Like, I'm not going to be what they're looking for, you know. And then at the end of that weekend assessment process, which is interesting because I was looking at things like, you know, we were discussing a lot of things about missional church and things like that. At the time, I didn't even know what missional church was. It wasn't until I started looking at this stuff and studying it that I realized, well, a lot of the stuff I was doing was missional church. I just wasn't into studying missional church because I wasn't into church planting, you know. I was in a little bit of a different stage. And so, you know, I got through the weekend assessment, and of the 4 people, for whatever crazy reason, I was the one that was kind of green lighted to move forward of the 4. and then our presbytery was kind of down to me, right? And so this was a point for me where I had to say, uh-oh, like I'm either going to have to withdraw myself from the process because I'm not willing to walk through these open doors, or I need to start really saying, and this is how, when I think of discernment and trying to discern call, I was at least willing to walk through open doors, and that's what I told myself. I said, if the door is open, I need to walk through it. I learned this lesson out of college and getting into ministry and into Fuller. I'm slow, but not that stupid. So I was willing to walk through the doors, and they kept opening. And so what I did was, I decided that I better learn. So like I said, I didn't even know it. I read everything on the missional church I could find. I mean, like, I had a couple of years to do this. So I'm talking like a stack of, a bookshelf full of stuff. And started learning and started really kind of taking that part seriously. And then discerning the call with my wife, she was kind of like me. She wasn't super interested in me doing this. And so part of the discernment for me was we both had to get to a place where we would say, yes, if this was truly a call from God, both of us needed to say yes. And so part of my agreement with the presbytery was if she said no, I was out. And that was just how it had to be. And as time went on and things kept progressing, she and I both were able to get to a place, and it just took us a long time, to where we said, this is clearly a call from God. The doors are continuing to open. It would be unfaithful to say no and to back out of this process at this point. And that's not what I want to be. So this is important to me, to try to remain faithful and do the right thing. And so we kind of got to the point where now we had to deal with the church I've been working at for 15 years and was very happy with. They did not know initially that I was in this discernment process with the presbytery. This is just something I was doing, exploring these possibilities. And then it gets to the point where, well, you're working full-time ministry job with a church that you grew up in, that you love, good relationships with people, and how do you handle this? So this stage is interesting for me, and this is why I think it took a while from the time of these initial conversations, 3-4 years before there was a definitive movement to plant a church. And part of that was because my pastor, who's an awesome guy and a great pastor, was not real interested. And so, when we first met, he was pretty surprised. So this is one funny thing, is Ken Baker comes out to Westminster Press, my office is there, and our church doesn't know. And so Ken is getting a tour from our pastor. He walks by my office and he says, "Hey, you talked to Rob about church planting yet?" No joke. This is not a joke. This is not the way that you want your senior pastor to find out that you're discerning the call to plant a church. Okay, so we got off to a really bad start. Like, it couldn't have been worse. I mean, you should have seen this guy's face. I mean, he didn't, and I don't blame him, because I had asked the presbytery, make sure that if we get to this point, you let me be the one to tell him. And that didn't happen. It was an accident. He didn't mean anything by it. But we got off to a really bad start. And so we started meeting at that point. And basically the bottom line is he said to me, "I fully support you, church planting. I think that this is really good for you. But you should move to Wyoming or Idaho or somewhere like that." And he was dead serious. Okay? So he wanted me to go away to plant somewhere else. And so, which kind of defeats the purpose of, kind of missional incarnational church planting model in a place where you have connections, relationships, you're established in a community already. I was fortunate enough to already have that a whole lifetime in this community, right? So it didn't make a lot of sense for me to go somewhere else. The call was clearly for the community that we're in, to do something that was a little bit different. And so this took a couple, I guess I waited from the time of our first meeting, I waited an entire year just praying about it, continuing to talk to a few people, Nick and Presbytery. And my elders session at our church, people did not know, and I kept it. I didn't even tell a lot of my good friends because I thought I would do so much damage to the kids and the program and whatnot. If things didn't work out either way, that wouldn't be the way to go about it. So I just was patient. And after a year, the personnel committee of session finally found out that I was in a discernment process, that the pastor knew about it, and they were really upset that they hadn't been notified, the session hadn't had a chance to weigh in and have a discussion. So they guaranteed me 30 days I would have an answer from Westminster Presbyterian Church about whether they wanted to support this new church plant or whether they didn't. And so similar to the other thing, what I told, my wife had to be on board, and what I told Presbytery is I felt that it was important that my church be on board also. I didn't want to be one of those people who just struck out on their own and some kind of maverick doing things some crazy way. I wanted to do it as a team, and I wanted Westminster, my family, all to say, we understand this call, we agree with it, we support it, let's work together. That's kind of what I was looking for and felt like I needed to be successful. And so a month later, I was finally invited to make a presentation to the church's session. After the presentation, they took 30 days to think about it, pray about it, and be able to sit down with me one-on-one and ask questions. And at the end of the 30 days, the next session meeting, they voted, and it was 100% unanimous vote, which is sort of miraculous. I just did not expect that. I expected there to be some real issues. I've been there for a long time. I knew they wouldn't be excited about it. So that was a big surprise to me. And the pastor who wanted me to go to Wyoming or Idaho or wherever, he got on board, and he came back from a sabbatical actually and said he'd been praying about it and thinking about it, talking about it with people on his sabbatical, and he came back and he had a complete 180. Supported it, wanted to move forward, wanted to be helpful, and so then it was that point that it was kind of a done deal. At that point, I knew I basically had a limited amount of time before we were going to be planning a new church. So that was kind of my struggle. Maybe one point of emphasis for me is I've never felt less confident, secure, or felt like I had what it took to do it than that year. That year, I felt constantly these voices saying, you're not good enough, you don't have what it takes, the church is never going to make it, it's probably going to fail like, whatever, 75% of other church plants fail, or whatever the numbers are now. And so that part was difficult, because just to be real honest, I'm not used to failure. Like the ministry stuff that I had done in the past was very successful, or I probably just would not have made 20 years in youth ministry. I was used to doing well, and I honestly thought that for a long time I really wondered, are we going to make it? And all the kind of self-doubt that was experienced was a real struggle for me, and I wasn't used to that. I hadn't really ever experienced that kind of struggle before, so that was something that was pretty new to me, and it forced me to pray a lot, and to really forced me to really rely on God and not rely so much on my abilities or my skill sets or whatever it was, some of the things that had made me relatively successful in ministry in the past, because I did not know what I was doing. I could probably say I'm probably as close to an expert as there is in youth ministry after 25 years of doing it. I am not an expert in church planning by any stretch whatsoever. My favorite phrase for me is pastors are people too. I mean, I don't know a lot about it. I definitely don't consider myself an expert. So the whole discerning call for me, that was a little bit painful, very slow. For some people, it moves a lot faster than that, but that's just kind of how it happened for me. So Any questions or comments or things you want to discuss about that discerning call process? Yeah.
Do you have like a moment or a time when like it kind of switched from self-doubt to, okay, this is I'm not doubting, this is happening, this is for real? Like, do you have like a certain time that happened, or do you feel like that kind of just happened over time, like it slowly just, you gain confidence and
Yeah.
were more sure of your call?
Yeah, good. I felt sure of the call about a year before we opened. So we opened October 6th of 2013. So by the time our session had said yes to it, my family had said yes to it, I was absolutely certain about the call. I had no doubts whatsoever, and I knew that I had to put 100% effort and hard work into the things I needed to do in that period of time to open. But the self-doubt stuff did not change at a moment or over time. I mean, that was much more gradual and over time. Because, if you spend a year in planning, just because you work hard, you plan well, you build a good team, none of those things guarantee success. I know people that have done this, that have worked just as hard as me, had built great teams, were just wonderful people, great hearts following Jesus, and they failed anyway. So I would say that was a slower process, just through a lot of prayer and some talking about it with some people that were close to me that I felt like I could be real honest with. And over time, that changed. And by the time we opened, I did not feel that anymore at all. It was gone. Not gone as in you never think about, oh my gosh, well, 3 years, are we going to be here? I have no idea. We can for 2 more years, when we're supposed to be financially sustainable, we might not be here. I have no idea. But I don't feel that I don't experience that every day anymore. And maybe that's having little successes. I'm not sure. Or achieving goals, or setting out, kind of when you set out to do something and you achieve some of those small things, it helps you take the next step and to realize, with God all things are possible. We can do what we've been called to do. So that was just much more gradual. Yeah. I wish I could say it was just one moment when it was gone, but it was tough. Especially for someone who doesn't normally experience that. Some people do experience that. I had not in my life. I'd never experienced anything like that. So it was something new for me. And I hope not to experience it again. We'll see. Yeah, anything else? Comments or questions?
Yeah, what about, can you speak to your wife and her experience? Because it sounds like with you, there were a lot of doors opening.
Yeah.
And you were saying that you just kind of like kept walking through those doors.
Yeah.
Right? And then, but what was it like for your wife? Did she have a similar kind of experience, or was she just kind of like leaning on what was happening with you, or?
A little bit of both. So she, she married someone who went into youth ministry and survived. We've been married 20 years, so we got married just a year after right around the time I started. So she was used to the crazy hours weekends and nights. There was a couple years where I was having to work 4 or 5 nights a week, and that's just unacceptable, So finally, when we had our kids, I was able to achieve a little bit better balance. And so she was nervous and saying, look, this is already hard. Now we have kids, and if church planning is going to, she kind of envisioned church planning to be even crazier and worse hours and whatever than youth ministry, okay? And so I think it was part talking, just working through it, and she, she's been here and worshiped with me here in NBC a couple times during that process too. So if I had a Sunday off, I was on vacation, I'd bring her here. I brought my kids here, my kids have worshiped here, and I wanted to say, just to see, I want them to experience what a church plant is, what it was like here, because it's very different, than our, I can't say, how to say this, just very traditional environment. And so I think she began to see, in talking with Nick too and Whitney, that there's some freedom, there's some experimentation, there's the ability to a little bit more freedom with your schedule. You have to work really hard, but you do have a little bit more freedom. And so she started kind of seeing that, and when she worshiped here, she loved it. She liked the people, and she liked the place and how things worked and whatnot. So I think for her, it was a gradual process of, yeah, the doors were opening for me, but she was, kind of walking through her own doors and getting herself to a place where she eventually said, you know what, I think we need to go for it and do it. So that was a gradual process too, though. It wasn't one thing, but over time, she got to the point where she said, yeah, I think we need to do this. You got to go for it. So it was fear too, it's the lack of stability. So if you're, when I was in the same job for the last 15 years, there's real stability, comfort, safety, these things that they're good things if you have, they're great things to experience if you have a family. God doesn't always keep us in comfortable, safe, secure environments. But with kids, it's something we had to really think about. We want our kids to be able to eat and go to college, and we had to pay for their bracelet. Just practical things like that. She was worried that, what if this doesn't work? If you look at the percentages and it doesn't work, well, what are you going to do? I don't know, flip burgers at Carl's Jr. I have no idea. But then just moving beyond that and discussing it with people, praying a lot and saying, God calls you sometimes to discomfort, a lack of stability. And that those things aren't necessarily bad either, they're challenging. They promote and give you some energy and some vitality that you don't have when you get kind of stuck doing something that you're good at or comfortable with. So it was working through that part of the practical side too that was helpful for her, so hopefully that answers your question. Other thoughts, questions? All right, well, we'll keep going. You can just stop me at any point and ask questions too if something comes up that you want to talk more about. So the kind of next phase for me, was the year transition from knowing that for sure that we were going to plant a church to the time we actually opened. So I was working full-time already in a ministry position. So this is something that's relatively unique to church planting, and when I talked to Nick about it, this is something that interests him because he says that what I did in the transition was pretty unique. So I'll just share that with you because it's something that he wants me to write up at some point too and be able to share. So we'll see if it's helpful for anyone. But I had a year. So basically, my goal was to train my replacements in that year, and then slowly pull myself out of doing the work of youth ministry and handing that over to other people, but while I was still there to oversee it. So I did a thing that was basically by September of 2012, when we knew we were going to do it, I started working 1 day a week, and I had to ask for this. This was a plan that I wrote for Westminster Presbyterian Church. I submitted it to the session, and they approved it. So if they didn't approve it, it wouldn't have mattered, right? But they allowed me to work 1 day a week starting in September, a year before we opened, for the new church, and pay me for it, which was nice. And then the rest of my time was dedicated to my normal job. And so I had a person that I wanted to move into my role, and so I had a full year to train him, which was awesome. This is a really ideal situation. And then by the time I got to January, I had asked for 2 days a week to work for the new church plant and the rest of my time for Westminster, all the while passing slowly little bits of responsibility to different people. And so I was in charge of not only youth ministry, but I started a more contemporary service, I don't like that word, but for lack of a better one, in a really traditional setting. So those are the two main areas of responsibility, so I had to kind of wean myself out of both of those areas in a year. So I just started passing things over. By the time I got to May, I was able to hire somebody else to work in the role that I was pulling the guy from to replace me, and then go 3 days a week from June to September, working for the church plant and a couple days a week overseeing the things, my responsibilities for Westminster. So, and then by the time I got to September 1, I went and made the switch full time. So it was a real gradual transition. It worked out actually for the most part really well. It doesn't have a great ending, but I'll get there in a minute. And so what I was doing for the new church was, I had to develop kind of a launch team of people. And so where are we going to get that? And so we worked out an agreement with Presbyterian, with our session, that they said, well, you can, if they're, up to a certain whatever, they said 5%. It's a big church, so there's no way I was going to take 5% of a large church. And so I broke the rules. So most people write out a list of people that they want to ask and invite them to join you, all right? So this is Nick, I drive Nick crazy with this. They just laugh at me. I actually asked no one to join with me. So here's what I did. Because I was at that church for 15 years almost as a staff position. I felt if I asked people, I knew that they would go. And I did not think that applying the relational pressure in my situation was the right thing to do. So I knew if I went and asked my friends and people that I know really well and I've been working with for a long period of time, I knew they would say yes. And I learned things from Nick and from other people that said, if you get the wrong people on your, kind of launch team, they're either going to leave or you're going to have to ask them to leave. And so, hearing things like that, I wanted to avoid that mistake at the beginning. And so what I said was, I asked for 2 preaching opportunities within like a 4-month period. And I did a kind of part 1 and part 2 on some missional church planning stuff. And then I was able to share as part of the illustrations in my sermon, here's what we're working on. And then I got permission to just say that if there's anyone that's been thinking about this, been praying about it, and they feel or hear this call to want to help start something new, then come talk to me. And then I did an adult education class and taught on some missional church planning stuff. I had little town hall meetings where people could come and ask questions about what we were doing. And then I just prayed and trusted that someone might be called to join with me in doing it. And I think we ended up with about 18 people that found me and said, I really feel called to this. I really want to be a part of it. And that's how I got our launch team. So, which is a little bit different than what most people do, kind of create the list, sit down. When you ask everyone, you assume that half will say no, so you double bullet size the list. I just didn't do any of that. My wife and kids were the only ones that didn't have too much choice in the matter. It's like my kids kind of, but they wanted to go, so they were cool with it. But they were kind of the only ones I actually had to go ask to do it. So that was kind of how I did it. And let's see, if there's anything else in this area. So I just slowly transitioned, was turning things over during a full year's time, and by the summer, by June, before we started 4 months later, I turned 100% over, all my responsibilities over, and did 3 months in a supervisory only role, making sure that, that things were going to work, especially for the kids and the families that I work with. I obviously care about them a lot, and I wanted the programs, the ministries that I was in charge of, I wanted them to be successful. I didn't want them to crash and burn like a lot of youth ministries do when people leave. I wanted to not have that happen. It was real important. And my kids go to the youth group. I've got all kinds of incentive to want these people to do well and carry on and run a really good youth ministry. So that was kind of how we did the transition. And then I had 1 full month of time just 100% dedicated to opening the church. But we had been meeting, so we met for 9 months weekly. So that 18 people, we met every Wednesday night from January to the day we opened. And we worked through, if anybody is familiar with it, starting new churches, PCUSA kind of help. We used that. I used a lot of stuff that I've been working on in my own study. There's books and things like that, the things I had found. We also used Tangible Kingdom Primer as a way to help people actually start to understand and practice some, develop some missional practices before we opened. So we were doing this stuff for 9 months before we started and actually opened the doors of the church. In the meantime, we had to secure funding. So funding's not exciting, but it is important. So we had kind of 3 sources of funding. We got the Presbytery gave us $150,000 over 3 years, and Westminster Presbyterian Church, my home church, the parent church, $75,000 over 3 years. And then I personally fundraised about $50,000 to get us open by calling people and sharing the vision of what we were trying to do and asking if they would be willing to pray about, a financial gift to help us get opened. And I had I'm not a fundraiser, so the fact that I raised, $10 is kind of a miracle, but 50 grand's not bad for someone like me who's kind of an introvert and I don't like asking people for things. So it's not easy for me, but we managed to. And then we got the PCUSA Level 1 church planning grant also. Qualified for that, applied and got it. So we had a good financial start, which is nice. It just meant that at least for that first year, we could sleep at night, which is important. And then I probably will start losing some sleep over it in the next 2 years, as now, starting in September, our funding decreases in the second year and then decreases even more in the third year. So now is probably when I'll start losing sleep. I have good coaches, so Craig Williams, has Craig spoken with you guys?
Yeah, first.
Okay, so Craig was my coach for my first year, and then Craig was kind of mentoring Nick and bringing Nick along as a coach. Now Nick has his coaching kind of certification, so Craig has passed me on to Nick for my second year. So I had good coaching also with people that have experience in doing it, and they're just great people. So I met with my coaches once a month with another guy, M. Blattner, who was in Moore Park. He and I are friends. We both came out together, would meet with Craig and Nick out this way. Once a month, we did that for at least, I think we did that the whole year before we opened. So I got to bounce ideas off them and tell them about the things that were doing well and the areas we were failing and trying new things. So I feel like I have had and have good help and good advice, good friends in those 2 guys. So maybe that's the end of that section as far as that kind of transition from getting out of one thing and moving as faithfully as possible into another. It's probably one of the things I think we did well. That transition plan was successful. It worked. Like I said, though, a minute ago, it didn't have a great ending. The guy that I trained for a year and was there for 3 years lasted 2 months in my job. And then was removed. So, great guy. He's just awesome. He's an awesome guy. It's a situation that we certainly wouldn't need to get into in this scenario, but it just goes to show you that, you can put the hard work in, you can do things the right way, and that's no guarantee that the outcome, And so they've now been, I actually went back and helped them through about 6 months and just showing up and teaching for them on Sunday night. So I was like, hard to imagine my schedule, what it was like trying to open a new church and then go back and help them. Eventually Presbytery kicked me out. May 1st this year, they said, you're not allowed to do that anymore. So I stopped, which is probably a good thing, because I probably would have just kept doing it until they got someone. They still don't have, they're in their 3rd round of a search. They still don't have my successor, which is a serious bummer, but they're doing great. they're doing fine despite all that stuff. So anyway, that might be the end of that section. Any questions, comments, things to discuss out of this?
I'd like to know more about what you did in your weekly launch team meetings. So
Yeah.
you worked through some books. Was it?
Yeah, so the basic template was the starting new churches. So they have 20, I could look it up, 20 some weeks of stuff to work through. So, we would do, we would do time of worship and prayer. And we got connected with our worship leader. And so before that person decided to jump on board, Jeff Boniver, I don't know if anybody knows him, but he helps out here once in a while when Bo's out of town, or he's done a couple times. But anyway, got connected to him, invited him, so he would lead us in some worship. We would work through whatever the starting new churches. There's a plan, there's kind of a whole plan. There's about 4 phases that you work through. And so some of the phases were pretty simple. A couple of them were really challenging. Coming up with what they call, a mission plan was actually very, very challenging for our group. And it was, they give you like maybe 3 or 4 weeks to get through that phase. We spent 3 months. So that was hard work. So we spent a lot of time with the starting new churches stuff. Tangible Kingdom Primer was an 8-week thing that we did after we finished with the starting new churches stuff. And then some of it was just my own. So I would write kind of a little devotional thing that we would do at the beginning. Then we would do some worship, and then we would really get into the work, which was the starting new churches stuff. And then each phase, I would have to submit my, the team's plan documents to my coach, Craig Williams, and Nick, and Presbytery. And so Presbytery is a whole nother, I haven't really talked about that. It's a whole nother thing. I don't know if we want to get into that or not, if that would be helpful, but talk about, messy or challenging. That's a whole nother layer of trying to do this. So is it worth mentioning that or not? Okay.
We can turn the camera.
Maybe we can do it.
Yeah.
Do it later.
Mostly my experiences with the Presbytery, which I was very committed. There's a few avenues, you can go and try. I didn't have to necessarily go through the Presbytery, I guess, but there's other things you can do. But I felt strongly that it was important to do that. And so, I had to get through a couple committees. So he asked about the MDiv, right? So when I got to Committee on Preparation for Ministry, they're like, you have an MA, and I see that you have 20 years of full-time ministry experience, which is awesome, but you don't have this one thing. And I'm like, this is exactly why, that highlights exactly why I sometimes get frustrated with the hoops that you have to jump through, the process, the whatever. I kind of thought that maybe 20 years of full-time ministry and preaching and teaching and all the things that I had done might count for something. And with some people, they do. With some people, it is changing a little bit. And I think with some people that they did take that into consideration. But then there's kind of the stickler, old school types who say, well, I had to do it, so should you. And those are the ones I have a hard time with that, But that aside, they did make me go back and take a couple classes. So I had to go back to school, which was not easy for me. I had the craziest year last year. Opening a church, I had to go back and take. Fortunately, they waived some of the coursework because they said, why would you take this? You've been doing it for a long, long time. I did go back and take Presbyterian Creeds and Confessions with Thompson, which actually, once I finished, I was happy that I did it. But man, was it hard. Anyone taken that class? All right. That class, it's challenging, having to do, the doctrine of the Trinity in 3 sentences. If you don't think that's hard, man, I'll tell you, volumes are written on that. You've got to do it in 3 sentences. It's a very challenging class. Anyway, and then I had to take polity. So, which, that makes a lot of sense. So you shouldn't open a PCUSA church if you don't have polity. Like, that makes a lot of sense to me. So I was happy to do those things because they made a lot of sense to me. And the other things they waived, Reformed worship and the sacrament. Stuff I've been doing for 20 years, so they waived a few things, which is nice. So you've got that group that you've got to get through, which I managed to do after my coursework and a lot of interview stuff. And I had to write, which this may be the crazy thing, is I actually had to write a business plan. So I didn't know what a business plan was. And even like Nick, when you talk to Nick about it, he even kind of chuckles because he's like, a business plan for, I mean, but that's what I had to do to get through Presbytery. They wanted more detailed information in writing. And so I kind of was putting that business plan together while we were working through some of the starting new churches stuff. I was having to do this on the side for the Presbytery. And then you got the money. I had to go through the Evangelism Church Growth Committee, ECG committee, to secure the funding. And that was challenging too. That's the group that wanted the business plan because they're the ones that are authorizing the money. And so that was kind of a challenge too. Eventually, it took a while to do that, but I managed to get through. And then something that I find pretty funny, so I was ordained as an elder in the Presbyterian Church, which means I can be, what do they call us now? Commissioned, they changed the name.
Commissioned ruling elder.
Commissioned ruling elder. They changed it from commissioned lay pastor to commissioned ruling elder. So I was ordained as an elder. Then I took my coursework to finish that kind of stuff. And then when just like, ordination, I had to go in front of the presbytery for examination. So that part they don't change that. And, so I got, because of my background and lack of ordination, I got some pretty good questions thrown at me. I think I must have done fairly well because I passed very, very well. I think that was a unanimous vote with the presbytery to commission me in that role, which is kind of a big deal because Nick and I are two very unusual people within PCUSA. I don't know anybody else. Dealing with the presbytery was interesting, but this is funny. You guys will appreciate this one. So on the floor of presbytery, after my commissioning, I get a letter from the presbytery, and they actually told me this right before I went up for my examination. So you can imagine what state you would be in when you're about to go onto the floor of all these. And there's some pretty smart people, like Dr. Thompson's in that presbytery. He throws at you. You guys have no idea the questions that guy might ask a candidate. It's crazy. So I was already really nervous. And then right before I walked up for my examination, they told me that my commission did not include weddings or the sacraments.
Oh, wow.
Of course. So how much sense does that make for a church planter? And so I'm freaking out. I'm like, this is unacceptable. This is exactly why I can't stand, your question about ordination. It just highlights everything I can't stand about the system. And so I'm freaking out going like, this is insane. Like, you cannot plant a church without being commissioned to minister the sacraments. Like, I went back to take, Thompson's class in polity and things like that, just to say, like, come on, I think I can probably handle this, And then I received the paper, which I now have up in my office. Don't tell anyone. I just find it funny, And so I said, look, then you're commissioning the wrong person. So after 4 years of doing this, I was going to be out like that. Because I'm like, this is insane. It doesn't make any sense. And so I had to actually jump through a few more hoops to get Committee on Ministry to change the commission to include. I actually went to Dr. Thompson and said, how could this happen? Even he was like, oh, it won't stay like that. Don't worry, you're fine. I'll help you out. So I had some people in my corner that were heavyweights that helped me out. They changed the commission. And so now I'm able to do all of the things I need to be able to do. I can actually marry somebody. Wow, that's amazing. And you know that anyone can marry someone in the state of California? Anyone? And yet they were honestly going to tell me that, hey, any knucklehead can marry someone in the state of California except for you. So anyway, but I'm not bitter. It's part of the deal. It's part of the deal of working on a team, working with multiple entities. I had to be willing to, I can smile and laugh about it now, but those few moments are pretty frustrating. Especially that moment receiving the tamed down commission was pretty frustrating, but it's funny now. Anyway, other comments, questions about that? How much time do we have?
As long as you want.
30 minutes? Oh, okay. Well, I'm close to a couple. I can talk about some of the current stuff, and then we can be done. Other questions about any of this stuff so far?
We want to know how the launch went, like exactly what
Yeah.
you did and all that.
Yeah, cool. So in preparing for the launch, like I said, we had about 18 people that were on the launch team, but interestingly enough, let's say 4 of them, I believe, had no intention of actually going. So this is another fascinating thing. I had one staff person that I worked with at Westminster wanted to help so bad and was so into it, but she could never go because of her job, that she just asked, could I do this with you? I'd like to be helpful. I really want to support you. And I was like, sure. And I had 4 of those. I had an elder. My elder in student ministries was the same way. He's like, this is so cool. I love what you're doing. I want to help you. This is the only way I know how to help. Would you mind if I did it? These people actually took a Wednesday night out of their week for a year to help us. And they had no intention, which I find that to be pretty cool. Like you could say, there's maybe a negative side to it too, but I saw it as a real positive. So we started with 14 people. And one of the things we worked through, and I don't remember where I got this idea, but I got it from somewhere. I don't know who to credit. But what we did was we said, after we were months in, we said that every launch team member really needed to think about and pray about people in their sphere of influence and that they're good friends with or whatnot, that they could invite and just say, hey, you want to participate with us and come check out what we're doing. And so we kind of put names on Post-it notes, put them all up, and we have this wall of here are people that God has placed on the hearts and minds of the launch team. And so we just started praying for them. And then the challenge is just to go take them out to coffee, take them out to lunch, and just tell them what we're doing and just see who might be interested. And then the other thing we did was one of the guys I have actually a Fuller student, Luke Phillips, anybody know him? He's finishing right now. Great guy. He's super into social media and stuff like that. It's not really my thing. But we did kind of a social media blitz to all of and I don't even want to explain it because you guys probably know it a lot better than I do. It's just not really my thing. But we all literally got together on one night and he logged into their Facebook accounts and their whatever and just sent out information on who we are and what we were trying to do. And then the personal invitation stuff was the most important, but the kind of social media blitz stuff too, just to get the word out to our friends that this is what we're doing, should anybody be interested. And so we opened October 6th, and I don't know, we had a bunch of friends and stuff, people from Westminster that were supporting us, and we probably had 65, 70 people come to kind of our launch event. We did one preview thing. We did kind of a prayer preview service. Actually similar, you know what? I was at this one. Nick did something like that, and Bo, and I can't remember her name, the one who does the children's. Yeah, they walked people through kind of a prayer thing too, right before entering this space, a couple Sundays before the church opened here and moved into this space. And so we did something like that. Instead of the preview route, the 3 months, preview services or whatnot, we elected to not do that. And just do one little, prayer service with the launch team in the space that we were going to be meeting in. So we're meeting in an event space. It's a warehouse space. The guy that does parties, bar mitzvahs, school, corporate, you name it, it's a party guy. His business card says professional party animal. We have a huge disco ball, theater lighting, a sound system. It's all black curtain. It's an event party space. And so his son went through my youth group. And when he heard that we were doing this, he's like, I've got this space. There's no parties at 10:30 on Sunday mornings. I would love it if you guys would start in here. And so the plus and the minus of that is it's great, and the rent is, we pay $1,000 a month in rent, which is very cheap, and I can use it other times too. So put it in perspective, I think that MVC was paying like $2,000 for the school before moving into this space, and that was really limited access. I mean, I can go over there anytime I want and use it when it's available for $1,000. So the price is right, and it's very helpful, but it's also a pretty cool space. It's a kind of blank slate space, so we do set up, but he gave us some storage, which is nice, so we don't have to trailer and haul everything in. We can store a lot of stuff there, which is very cool. Let's see, what specific parts can I help with about that?
Why did you guys elect not to do the preview services?
I'm not sure I even remember why. Just not feeling the need for, like, the say practice to try to get something right. We had the few people that we have. I only have 2 staff people, myself and a worship leader, both with a lot of worship experience. I mean, we've both been creating, designing, leading worship services for years and years and years, and just didn't feel like we needed to do it. But also, I don't know, sometimes preview services are kind of used maybe to gain some momentum, or I don't know, we just didn't feel like that was we didn't feel like we needed to do it. We just wanted to start and we didn't want to test, we just wanted to go, Well, we'll test this out. I guess our thinking is we can experiment in worship and do some things that are different. And I don't know, we didn't need a preview service to do it. If we do something and it doesn't work, we won't do it again, We put up an easel and we have a station that no one's ever using. All right, well, guess what? Our people don't want to do that. They don't want to draw. They don't want to, so we won't do it. So I don't know. I mean, there wasn't, in talking to Nick too about how they did it, and listening to some feedback from some other people who've done some preview services, Nick was, he's saying kind of, I'm not sure we do that again the way we did it. And so just learning from some people who went before and not feeling the need to do it necessarily. We couldn't come up with great reasons to do it. We wanted to make sure we were ready to go on the morning of our open with technology. So we tested the space out ourselves, with the sound and lighting and how things would work, and testing out the technology stuff to make sure, we weren't just a total disaster. But I do have the only other employee is a 5-hour-a-week person who helps with, he's a sound tech, but he does more than that. He helps with some other technology stuff, video and whatnot. And so he's just a 5-hour-a-week. The worship leader's part-time, and I'm the only full-time person. We don't have any administrative help, which is kind of a bummer, but it is what it is. We're not gonna have any, so I'm already used to it. All of our stuff is, most of our areas of ministry are led by volunteer staff, which is the greatest. It's great. It's also challenging. It presents unique challenges. They're not staff. They are not paid. It's like hiring and firing a staff volunteer those are crazy things. Having to, one person, we've had to make one change since we started. Not an easy transition change when they're a volunteer. They've just put their heart and soul into something, and it's not really working. Those are challenges. But working with volunteer positions like that, I think it's great. And building teams of people and ownership. In churches with large staffs, which is what I was used to working on, people don't have to take ownership because the staff is expected to do everything. In a church plant like this, a small startup, what staff? If it's going to get done, people have to put their weight into it. It has to be important. They have to be willing to work hard. And so fortunately, the few people that we started with are. And so I feel really blessed to have the volunteer teams that we have. They help carry the ball, and it's important to everyone, and everybody works together. So, having volunteer teams is like the blessing and the curse at the same time. Some respects they're harder to deal with. if something goes wrong. But mostly things have gone well with our team. So, we meet, our worship gathering is every Sunday morning at 10:30. So that's important. It's an important thing for us. And actually, I would say that as time has gone on during the year, I'm learning that it's more important than I thought it was to start. Some church planting people really downplay corporate worship, and what I find is I don't find that to be, in my context, it's very important. And so we work hard at it. Being organized, prepared, having a plan, trying to, at least to the best of our ability, to execute the plan, not just be lax about it. We take it real seriously. We may do things differently or whatnot, or experiment a little bit, but they're intentional experiments. So that's something that I'm learning that is actually becoming more and more important in our context, because that's what people ask for, expect, and want. And so I know in talking with Nick, he says the same thing here, that he started out thinking one thing, and a couple years later he's saying, wow, people are asking for more. They want me to preach longer, which is crazy, right? Most people are like, can you cut some time off your sermon? Nick has people asking him for longer sermons, more in-depth, more time given to it. And so I'm finding the same thing as him in my context, that's an important kind of thing. So I'll just give you some current stuff. Just numbers aren't real that important to me, but just so you kind of know, in a year, we probably average about 45 people a week in our worship gathering. We probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 75 people who might willingly associate with us, say that they're in some way connected to what we're doing. And let's see, some of the things were important to us is, reaching non-church families and de-church families were kind of things we thought we would be able to do a lot better than our more traditional churches in our community. And so I would say that we've actually achieved some of that. We have a family who's never been to church before in their life, and they come every Sunday. It's not all about getting someone to come to church, but it certainly at least is an indication that some of the things that you've tried are helping and they're working. We have some families that have not been in church for years that have been able to find a home with us, those are exciting things when you see that some of the things that you've done have been successful. So I'm just I think those are things that give you some more energy and kind of keep pushing to try to reach more of those folks who just burned out on church, had a bad church experience, or someone that frankly has never even been involved or part of a church before. So the few ministries that we have at the moment are, we have our weekly worship gathering, we have a ministry for kids. So what that looks like for us is we have a Sunday school class, and kids in our context are in half of the worship service, and then they're out for half. So they're in with us for about the first 20, 25 minutes. And sometimes we have stuff specifically for them, but we just kind of hope that the things we're doing in the front end are ways that kids can participate. And so we have a kids corner, which is our other kind of part. So you got the stations set up around the room, we have a kids station in our worship space. And so every week the kids just run in, they get a donut hole, a cup of hot chocolate, and they just beeline right for their table. And there's usually something for them to do, like this past Sunday, we decorated placemats for a homeless shelter meal that we're actually doing, we're cooking and serving tomorrow night. And so the kids all made these, decorated placemats. Adults did it too. So our kids corner is like adults and kids use it every week. So it's kind of a fun place for people to hang out. So we kind of have that for kids. We have our weekly worship gathering. We have what we call, actually NBC has something like it, like a needs ministry, where there's two kind of things that we do each Sunday. People can submit prayer requests, and we have a team. We kind of write those up every week, and we resend them back out so that people are constantly praying for the needs of the congregation. And then helping to meet some physical needs. A college student needed to be moved last week. So we got 5 people together and we moved him across the valley. You know, so things like that, matching up someone who needed a microwave, older woman, didn't have any money, couldn't afford a microwave, we got him a microwave, things like that. So we kind of have that needs area that we work in, and it's usually within the context of our church community, but it also, not necessarily. We scholarshiped a couple kids for a mission trip, so they're not always specific to, or sometimes they're community oriented, depending on the needs of people and what comes in. Let's see. And maybe the thing that I'm most pleased with is we, in our process, you know, questions about what we did on our weekly meetings. One of the things that we really struggled with, and the reason it took us so long, was we were trying to figure out a way that, so, you know, looking at ways individuals connect to their community, the non-Christian, non-church community, right? So this is really important to us. So we were looking like, so for me, I coach high school basketball. And so as a part of my missional commitment, when I started thinking about, you know, missional church planning, I said, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to be intentional about it. Where's a place that I connect? I had already been coaching basketball. And right when I started thinking about this missional stuff, a school, my local high school, came to me and said, would you take this job? And I was like, oh, are you really? And I don't know about that. And then I had to ask permission. Did my church care that I did that? They gave me permission to do it. So I started doing that very intentionally as one individual. So as a team, we were trying to come up with a way that our launch team would connect to the non-church community. And so after a lot of discussion, a lot of prayer, a lot of looking at different avenues, we came up with a local elementary school that needed some help, and we met with the principal. So I have a volunteer that's in charge of the school partnership, and then myself, and we started meeting with the principal, and the principal, by the end of the first meeting, she goes, so if I asked you, you'd get us boxes of Kleenex, what would you say to that? And we're like, yeah, if that's what you need. Oh, so, you know, if our teachers need reams of paper, you guys would be willing to do that? And I said, sure. Whatever, we want to help meet the needs of your school, because they needed some help. And so we formed this school partnership, and out of it has come not only things like that, but we started a tutoring program for kids. So every Tuesday and Wednesday, we tutor 3rd and 4th grade kids. And we have a team of volunteer tutors that go in for an hour and a half, 2 days a week, and tutor kids that are 1 to 2 years behind, which means that those kids aren't going to make it if they don't get some extra help. We put on a teacher luncheon for them, just, you know, asked permission, said, hey, is this something you guys would be interested in? Got a big pasta lunches, 50 teachers came in, we just sat down with them, ate, hung out. And so the school partnership is something that we've done that's been, I'd say, I guess, you know, depending on how you define success, you know, if you're looking to get people to come to your church, maybe by those definitions, we're not successful. If we're looking to learn to become a blessing to our community, then I would say we've been successful. And so that's what we're looking to do, find ways that we can become a blessing to our community, a place that we can make a difference, and develop and cultivate relationships that maybe over time someone does want to come hang out with us. I don't know. But anyway, we're pretty pleased with that. That's probably the other. And we did like a big serve day there too. We've done projects at the school. We've painted for them. We've done all kinds of that. Anything you can think of for a school, we're getting into with them. You know, we received a letter from. They're thrilled. A year after we started partnering with them, they're just super thrilled that we're there. And all the roadblocks that you might hear about church in a public school, we're the little guy in the community. And I have pastors of big churches finding me saying, how'd you guys do this? How'd you get involved in a school? We've been trying to get connected to a school for years and no one will even return my emails, you know? So it's interesting, and we find that, you know, just developed good relationships with the principal and the staff, and that's kind of where it started. And so those fears about like public school and church have just completely disappeared, you know. The teachers will ask us what we're doing and who we are, and this is maybe my favorite thing. I have an atheist photography teacher from the local high school that's on our tutoring team. Now, to me, that says something. This guy heard about what we were doing and said, well, you know, I'm not a Christian. I'm actually kind of not really happy with church. I had bad church experience when I was a kid, but I like what you guys are doing. Would you ever consider someone like me as a tutor? I'm like, are you kidding? This is like, we live for this, you know? It might have been the happiest moment in my last year, is to see this guy come every single week with a bunch of church people to tutor kids at a local elementary school. He's a teacher. He finishes his job and he goes straight over to another school to work another hour and a half with some underprivileged kids, which I think is pretty awesome. And then we had a party, Cinco de Mayo party, and the guy showed up to my house for a church party. Now, there was beer there, and free food, so that probably helped. But it's pretty cool. This guy, he likes people that are followers of Jesus Christ, maybe for the first time in his life. And that's a start. You know, I think having those conversations, and finding ways to connect and relate and develop those relationships through things like the school partnership are really exciting. This is the exciting stuff that we get to do with our church. So the thing that we want that we don't have is a small group ministry, and we're almost there. So we're going to start slowly in the fall, but we're going to kind of launch a small group ministry that we're currently working on right now. And so those are kind of the few ministries that we have. We do quarterly fun events, just have Christmas party, we had a Cinco de Mayo party. We do some, like I said, some local mission stuff. We're cooking and serving a meal tomorrow night. So we do those kind of things, as well as our school partnership, which is kind of our ongoing every week thing that we do in the community. And then our people are, hopefully like me, coaching. Our people are finding ways to connect to the non-church community around it, and that's kind of what we're pushing and hoping for. Comments or questions about that? Yeah.
The kids ministry and some of these other ministries, did you guys start those like the same week that you started the worship service, or how did?
Yeah. We started everything except for the school partnership on opening day. The school partnership just wasn't ready to go the first day. We started that a couple months later. We were talking to the congregation about it and just sharing, this is what we're working on. And it was when we had a dolly, we filled it with reams of paper and boxes of Kleenex. And we drove to the school, we went to this teacher staff meeting, we wheeled in 2 dollies worth of stuff, and the teachers gave us a standing ovation before they met us. And that's how the school partnership got started, after meeting with the principal, of course, and getting permission to show up there. But you know, that was kind of how that started. So the kids, ministry to kids, we had that stuff all set up and ready to go before we opened. The one thing we wanted a small group ministry earlier. We wanted to have it this year, but it ended up being not feasible and trying to do all the things that we were doing. So we're a little late to the party on that one, but we're trying to start something like that.
So you opened in 2013?
Yep, almost a year. So we're coming up on a year.
So
And
for
then-
you, okay, go sorry, James.
Oh, so when was the timeline was, you did your year at the church where you were transitioning out? When was that?
The year before, 2012 fall to fall of 2013.
And you got ready all that time and you finally opened like basically
Yes.
right after you left the church?
A month after
Okay.
I left officially, we opened.
Okay.
Yes.
So for your opening day, did you try and do some things to ramp up? I know you didn't do preview services, but did you try to like launch as big as possible? Did you do any kind of like marketing? I know you did some talking about the Facebook Blitz.
We did the social media marketing stuff. We did no mailers. 1, because we couldn't afford it, and 2, because in our context too, so I guess you can think of, there's, you know, like really local churches where people are going to walk or ride their bike or do that kind of thing. Our community is a little bit different in that it's maybe what I would call the community is really 4 or 5 surrounding cities. And it's the Conejo Valley. So people in our area would say, oh, they're willing to drive across. If you're going to go to a restaurant, you drive across, but you're not going to necessarily go outside of that. So our community is maybe not just a single city, but we're actually made up of people from like 5 communities that are all right next to each other. So the social media stuff was big, the personal invitation was big, and then we were in constant communication and dialogue with our home parent church. So like we started making a newsletter, we started sending that out to anybody who would be willing to take it. You know what I mean? And just said, hey, you know, with the social media stuff, if you're interested in this, click here. We had website, which is woefully not up to date right now because my person is having trouble. But we were up to date for a while. And things like that's what we did. No mailers though, because the geographic area is too big for the mailer. I guess if we were to move into a neighborhood, I would consider that. But right now I'm in an industrial park. So if I move to a neighborhood, I might consider an occasional one or once a so often mailer, but personal invitation and the social media is kind of how we got the word out. You know, and that's all we did. Now this is something we need to think about though, because you know you're given 3 years to become self-sustaining. And so, you know, you finish year 1, it's not that big a deal because we had some good funding sources. Year 2 gets a little more challenging. Year 3 gets even more challenging. Just ask Nick how that went for NBC. He'll tell you that he started losing sleep progressively more and more as that 3rd year was approaching and getting through it and wondering, you know. So those are things that we're going to have to think about, and we're going to have to do better and more than we've currently done. Like, I know that. Because we cannot be financially sustainable where we're at. So we either don't exist in 2 years or we grow. So we're going to have to consider other things. There'll be things that we're talking about more and more, but it wasn't our primary concern in launching a church. We had other things that were more primary than the money because we felt like we had done a good job to get us started. But there's going to come a point sooner than later where we'll have to think more about that and maybe do some better marketing and figure out ways to get the word out and stuff like that. We did get one article in our local paper because of our school partnership. The paper heard about us and they were kind of intrigued that a church was working with the school, and so they put a couple pictures of us working there in a little short article, which got us a tiny bit of it did. That doesn't mean much aside from, you know, trying to get the word out about who you are and what you're doing. So we do a very mediocre job right now, and we'll need to do better soon. Other thoughts, questions?
You talked about kind of one of the reasons that you wanted to do this was that you wanted to do something new. You know, you wanted to do something a little different.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel like you've been successful in those ways? How has that been difficult? Planting from another church and trying to do something different.
Yeah.
I mean, you're obviously still connected to, you know, the presbytery, the church, but you're also trying to do something different.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you feel like that's gone really well, and then where do you feel like that's been a lot more difficult than you expected? Or
yeah, good question. I think we're pretty fortunate in that we do have the support of the parent church, and we do have this full support now of the presbytery. And I guess maybe what does that mean? Aside from dollars, it means that also they believe in what we're doing. Like our parent church would say, we cannot do what you guys are doing, want to do. That's not who we are necessarily, and maybe they probably would not be very good at it. But they recognize the need for it. And so that's what makes for a true partnership, is they can do things that there's no way we could ever do. We don't have any money. We don't have a you know, multi-million-dollar facility. I mean, we're two very different, you know, we're small, adaptable, flexible, quick moving. They're a monolith, slow. You want to get anything done, change a light bulb, you got to go through 3 committees. I mean, it just, so they recognize that we can do things that they can't. We know that they can do things that we can't. So that's what a partnership to me looks like. So they're supportive of what we're doing, and we have full freedom and autonomy to do the things we need to do. So we don't have oversight, aside from the parent church, aside from, you know, they are giving money, so they're certainly entitled to information and dialogue and things like that, but they don't have any oversight as far as over the kinds of things we're doing. So I think the things we've been most successful at are things like the school partnership, where that's what we set out to do, is to develop and build relationships with non-church going folks in our community, and to learn to become a blessing. So that, you know, I would ask a question like, would anybody care in the community if Lightshine, that's what we're called, Lightshine Church, if we closed down, you know? And I think that this school would care. I think they would be greatly disappointed. It would be hard for them if we all of a sudden, or we just, yeah, we're done. We're done with you guys. I think we actually matter to the school now. And that's where I would say something that we've done well. Maybe the area that I would say is challenging is the personal, having people, you know, especially folks that are coming out of a more traditional church setting, is trying to not just understand, you know, missional incarnational ministry, but living it, are 2 very different things. And so helping people find that place where they personally, individually fit in somewhere in the larger community, that are there, places where they're intentionally not connecting with their church friends, that is a challenge. That is a huge challenge for us. And so it's constant education, re-education, and trying to help people, meet with them, talk with them, figure out, well, what do you like to do, you know? I love basketball. I mean, it's ridiculous. I'm like an addict, you know? So it was an easy fit for me, because I had already been coaching. I love basketball, and I'm a youth pastor. What better way? How can I give back? It was the easiest. How can I connect to the non-Christian community? I mean, I connect with hundreds of families in my area now because of coaching. So for me, it was easy once I figured that out, but it's not always easy for people to figure out. They say, well, gosh, all I do is hang out with church people, or, you know, well, I guess, I like to play Ultimate Frisbee. Does that count? Yeah, it counts. Go join the Ultimate Frisbee group that plays consistently, you know, every Tuesday at 3 o'clock, and build relationships with these people. Get to know them, you know, as they get to know you, they get to know what you do. You know, so that's probably been the biggest challenge as far as some of the new stuff, is helping individual people discover where they can connect to the non-church world. And not everyone's used to that. For some people, that's real easy. For others, not so easy at all. As far as our doing kind of things in worship that are different, or maybe more creative, or not as coming out of a real traditional setting, people have liked the things we're trying, and we're not getting a lot of complaining, and a lot of people actually. This is the thing that also makes it kind of exciting, is people want to come to our worship gatherings, which is fun. It's not drudgery. It's not out of obligation. You know, a lot of people go to church out of obligation. They feel like they have to. They're supposed to. It's what they grew up with. It's what their mom and dad taught them. It's whatever. We're finding that people can come to a worship gathering, enjoy themselves, enjoy other people, and still encounter the reason we're there. Encountering, you know, Christ and worship is those things aren't mutually exclusive. You know, so I think those are some of the things we've done that have been good too. The struggles are working people in volunteer staffing positions. That's challenging. The marketing stuff is challenging for us a little bit, just because we're so small, and I don't necessarily have fuller interns. Because of my geographical location, I'm too far. So trying to do as much as you can with less is always a challenge. You know, I don't. Did I get at you?
Yeah. Yeah,
Anything
very
else? Okay.
Do you guys have something for youth?
No. So we do have some teenagers who come, and we encourage them to participate in the youth ministry group that I came out of at our parent church if they want a youth group specific. So like right now, my daughters are on a mission trip to New York. Actually, my wife went with them, so I'm on my own for a couple days. And so there's a few teenagers, and we just say, if you're looking for, if this is what you're interested in, it's right around the corner, it's not far away. So I just refer people to there if that's what they want, but we actually have no intention of starting a youth group at the church, not now. That doesn't mean that there never will be one. I'm just saying it's not on our 1-year plan or 3-year, 5-year. We don't intend to do that. So what's important for us in our context is whole family. So that might be something that makes us a little bit unique too, is we are trying to do things with whole family units, whatever that is, and that's different for different families, but it's really important to us that we connect our kids, whatever age, to, and this is learning from 20 years of youth ministry, the best youth ministries connect kids to adults that are not their parents. If you fail at that, you're probably failing as a youth ministry, I think I would go so far as to say. And so we're trying to live that out in a whole church context as opposed to just a youth ministry context. So the things that we do, we make, if they're not kid friendly in some way, we're probably not going to do it at this point. So, we try to make the things that we're doing fairly family friendly. So we have to work at that because it's not always easy, and sometimes maybe we're not always successful either, but we do try. That's our effort. So the kids are only out for about 20-25 minutes where they get a specific thing that's age appropriate, teaching, Sunday school, a little craft, Bible lesson, whatnot. And then half the time they're with the rest of they own the place. It's really cool to see, an 8-year-old run into your worship space and just like they do it. I've seen them do it here too when I've been here. They just run around and they know where they want to go and they've got something for them to do, and that's pretty exciting. The teenagers, it's a little bit different with teenagers. But I was a youth pastor for 20 years, so I know how to engage teenagers in the worship context. So that's what we're trying to do. Whether we're super successful, you'd have to ask my daughters. I don't know.
I have a follow-up question. Do you think that has made it challenging for people with, I guess you have teenagers, so that's your own story too, but like people that would come to your church, but because maybe there isn't something specific for their youth, they wouldn't?
Oh, that is a great question. The answer is yes. I don't have numbers for you, but I can promise you that we are not for everybody. I know that. And yes, I've had that happen where there aren't age-specific programming for kids. And it might sound crazy to say from a 20-year youth pastor, but I'm not much for age-specific programming for kids in church. There's a place for it, but if that's all that there is, I think the church is in trouble. We already know this. The church is already in trouble. You don't need me to spout off statistics about what's happening to the church in North America or what's already happened in Europe or wherever. And age-specific programming for kids is probably one of the contributors. It's like kids are not a part of a whole church. They don't know how to interact with adults. They don't have other adults that care about them, that they can go to if they're in trouble. They don't realize that these other adults outside their families, they care about them, they want to see them succeed, they want to help them succeed. And the fact is that a lot of people in traditional church settings do not accept what I just said, as beneficial to their family. So I recognize that, and if someone wants to talk about it, I can talk about that subject matter all day long, And we know that we're not going to be for everybody. Someone has to buy into that. They have to believe that that's good for their kids. And if they don't, we're definitely not going to be, we understand we're not going to be for them. So we just try to push whole families. And what we say is when we see that when a visitor were to come and they were to see kids having a wonderful time, being engaged in a whole church setting, hopefully that would be encouraging to a family. It would be for me. I'd be like, man, these kids are having a blast in here. Look at this. They're just running around. They've got, you know, they're engaged. They're happy. They want to be here. I have kids that bring their dad, three boys, that bring their dad to church every Sunday, who left the church 20 years ago and said he'd never go back. Those kids want to be there so bad. The dad's like, how could I'd be loser dad of the year if I didn't bring my kids every week. So he comes every week. You know, so that's what I'm hopeful. My prayer is people see that ought to be encouraging, you know. And if they say we need age-specific programming for our kids, or the other side, you know, a lot of parents want a break. And so church is a part where they give their kid to someone else and they get a break. And I had twins. I understand nobody knows the need for a break more than this guy, okay? So I get it, but it's just short-sighted, you know? So short-sighted goal is, you can have that hour, or that hour could mean potentially a kid following Jesus for a lifetime. I'll take my chances with the, little lack of sleep and rest to try to get my kid in a situation where they can, be a part of something bigger than themselves. And it's just absolutely critical for kids to discover that. So it's not going to win me a lot of friends necessarily that are coming from a traditional church background, but I find that it does win me some friends with people not coming out of a traditional church background. They love it, They're like, oh, this is cool. Like I have something I can do with my kids. We can go to church together. We can worship together. We can sing together. We can do this art project together. I mean, some people love. I'm finding that, like the D-church, non-church folks seem to like it a lot. It's the people that have been in the church for, decades that are like, oh man, you don't have a first grade Sunday school class for my kid? It's like, no, I've only got like 10 kids in the entire church, so they're kind of all together. And we figure out ways to get the older kids involved in helping the younger ones. I mean, you have to work hard at it, but it's rewarding. That work is rewarding. It's fun. It's challenging.
And the babies, they stay in the service the whole time.
They do, but I have a space that's got a glass door right on our worship space. It has couches and stuff. And so I have one baby that comes with some regularity, some consistency, and sometimes she'll be in the service with us. The mom can take her, or actually some of our teenagers help with that. One of the things we did for babies was say, and actually I asked this woman, I met with her, because I was really thinking, I struggled with what do we do, because we don't have a nursery. And so she said, you know what would be really cool if I came to your church, if someone helped me with her, this would be a great thing for me. So I went to my daughters and I said, if she were to show up in church, would you guys, could you help me out with this? And they're like, sure. So she showed up, she brought her baby. One of my girls took her and walked her around and got to know her. And now my kids babysit for this little girl, every couple of weeks. And she comes and brings her baby. So it's not a perfect system. But we ask people to help out with a person in that situation that comes in if they want to help. And if they need to go check out and go into that other room, close the door and whatnot, they can do that too. It's far from perfect, but it's how we handle it at the moment in this space. Other thoughts? Questions? Let me see if I think I hit most of the stuff that I wanted to talk about. Just make sure.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Were there
Please.
things that, when you were, you decide on your date or whatever, this is the date that we're gonna launch the church.
Yeah.
What's the list of things that said, okay, this we have to be ready to do for this Sunday?
By the time we launched,
Yeah.
well, I mean, the things we had to have in place, we had the technology, the space, you have the stuff to do with the space. So, you know, how are we going to project, use video? We had equipment to buy, we had some things we were able to use from there. So we had the whole kind of technology piece. We knew we had to have that in order before we started. Microphones and cabling, and you name it, just all the technology pieces. We obviously needed to have the few staffing positions that we have. We needed to have those well solidified long before we went into it, which we did. As far as what we were going to do for a worship gathering, the planning of what would a worship gathering look like for us, that took us months. You know, we worked on that for months. Myself, the worship leader that we hired, and the launch team helped design and create what worship might look like in that context. So we had to be ready for that. We wanted our school partnership idea, the way we connected the community, we wanted that solidified before we opened, even though the details weren't done. We wanted the partnership to be officially formed in the school or whatever it was going to be, but it turned out to be the school to say, yes, we want to do this, so that on opening day we could say, here's what we're trying to do, here's how we want to do it, and to start kind of some of that vision casting stuff right on the first day. We wanted to talk about what the church was, what the mission of the church was, and what missional church was, and we wanted to start that right away on day one. So first sermon series was on the church and what its purpose and role and how we as a new community fit into that, or what God was trying to do through the church. So we wanted to have all that stuff done beforehand. You know, like I said, we had the needs, how we were going to do the few ministries that we had. The kids, ministry to kids, that was the one that made us the most nervous, was the kids coming out of a full-time background working with kids and then going to having no programming for kids was like a gigantic chasm for me to get over, you know. So we worked hard on that, having that stuff set in place, teach a few teachers for a rotation for teaching curriculum, what will we use, how would you teach a class that has a first grader and a fourth, fifth grader in it, you know, that kind of stuff. Obviously the practical stuff, all the financial stuff with the presbytery, working out the financial stuff with my church, home church, partner church. I mean, all that stuff, it just was a ton of work, you know, trying to get all that stuff in order before we started, but managed to. I'm not sure I'm answering
Yeah, and
your
so
question.
the launch date for you, that was like, okay, I'm finishing my job and we're just getting started. How did that date come about?
Yeah, well, we wanted the first Sunday after Labor Day. We wanted a month earlier, but we knew we weren't ready. So because things pushed us so much, like the things like discovering our mission plan, what might that look like for us? That took us so much longer than, say, the book asked for. I mean, 3 weeks to 3 months. So you say we got delayed because it's hard work, you know. It's hard work getting it right and figuring out where your church fits into a community is much more difficult than we thought it would be. So that pushed us a little bit. So we thought we weren't in a hurry per se to launch. We wanted to launch well rather than beyond whatever our timeline in our head was, you know. So we just pushed a month because we thought we needed that 1 month of full-time 100% effort to make sure that everything was in place, that we could. I mean, the foreseeable things, you know.
So from the year of planning, you guys had a launch date in mind that you were working towards?
Working towards it.
And then it was like,
The
okay,
beginning
no,
of
we'll just
September,
push it back
we just
a month.
pushed it a month. Yep. We probably could have launched in September, but we wouldn't have been as ready, you know? So like you talk about preview or whatever, the reason to do preview services would have been something like that. We wouldn't have been ready, but we wanted to be ready and just go for it. So instead of kind of guessing, we just put more work into it.